The late morning program with Nam Ras podcast.
Release gradually, and then I'm traveling. I have a few countries that I'm responsible for, so I tend to travel to those countries a lot. In Portugal, Brazil, different places like this.
All right, we're rolling. Hey, so Hare Krishna, you're listening to the Nam Ras podcast, the #1 Hare Krishna podcast in the world. I'm very honored to have Swami Revatikanta here with me today from the Bhakti Marga group. For those of you who don't know, it's a group that Swami will tell us about, who are very popular these days and growing very quickly. That I'm very fascinated by that. And also have my co-host as usual. It's either my brother-in-law or it's Dina Bandhu. So Dina, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here. Happy to be meeting Swami and to be with you all.
Yeah. So, and also off screen is Jai Gopal Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining us as well. And maybe Swami, you can start off by telling us a little bit about your spiritual journey, how you started, how you became a Swami.
Sure. So I was really young when I met my guru. So I was 15 when I met him. Not any gurukuli process, but just I had been to India a few times. I'd lived there for a few years because my mom was very much pursuing a spiritual path in India. And she didn't find what she was looking for. She ended up coming back to Europe to work, and I stayed there in a boarding school. So I was 3 years in boarding school in India.
Really?
Yep.
Where in India?
In Bangalore.
Oh, wow.
And this was a secular boarding school, or it had a particular spiritual?
No, secular. Yeah. It was very high achieving Indians looking to go to American universities, English universities, that sort of thing. And it was a nice environment. I liked it. It pushed you. It was cool. But I was going home for summer holidays with my parents, and they were living in England at the time. And then I went one summer holiday when I was 15, and I met my guru, Paramahamsa Vishwananda. He was there, and my mother, by chance, had come across one of his devotees who had invited her to come and meet him. So she brought the whole family, and I came along. And when I met him, I was 15. I wasn't particularly looking for anything spiritual or religious. Neither was I against it. My mother, as I said, was very spiritual, so she had already sort of conditioned me a little bit in the direction towards being open to this sort of thing. And when I met him, I think the thing that most touched me, because he's very young, relatively speaking, and at that time he was 27 when I met him, and I was 15. And it just touched me how different he was to anybody I'd ever met. And it wasn't anything that he said, because I wasn't even paying attention too much of what he was saying. It was just that his, for want of a better expression, his aura, right? But he had this smile on him specifically that I remember that just looked like he knew something that I didn't know. Like, what's he happy about? To that degree. And it left an imprint on me. And after I left that short meeting with him, I couldn't enjoy myself anymore to the extent that I used to, even at the age of 15, because I kept remembering his smile whenever I would go and do the things that would make me happy. And I would compare my smile and myself to that smile, and it would always fall short. And I would think, he's got something, and I really need to go and ask him what it is that he knows, what it is that he has that makes him smile the way he does and makes him as happy as he is. And so fast forwarding a couple more meetings, going to some kirtans, going to some satsangs, going to some of his events. And yeah, he interacted with me, and I started to ask him, and I said, why are you as happy as you are? And he smiled and he said, because I have God with me, right? And I said, wonderful, can I have that too? And he said, sure. And honestly, it was as simple as that, how it began. And it was just sort of, so will you teach me? Yes, I'll teach you. Let's go. Truth is, I was very superficial about it in the beginning, because it was just, oh, cool, there's this wise man who's going to teach me how to be happy. But life goes on, school, all these things. And then life started to throw events at me that really made me question, how can I put it? Question the trustworthiness of material life. So I'll give you an example. I got in some trouble with the police at one point, circumstantially, because I happened to be in a time and place where a crime was happening. And just because I witnessed it, I was suddenly an accomplice. And they're like, oh, you need to come in for interrogation. You might be part of this crime, and you might go to prison for 8 years.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, this is a joke, right? I mean, I just saw it happen. I didn't do anything. Yeah, but you didn't report it, so. And then as the conversation went on with the police, this process dragged on 6 months to the point where it started to become a real possibility that I was going to go to prison for 8 years. And I remember distinctly thinking that time, this is so crazy to me because I am innocent. I didn't do a thing, right? And yet my friends can't help me. My parents can't help me. There seems to be nothing really that is going to help me except chance or the mood of some judge, or it felt so bizarre to me. Like, and it really hit me deeply about how untrustworthy this whole thing is, because I may be constructing a life, building a career, doing anything, and in just one moment where I just happen to be at the wrong time, wrong place, innocent, and yet I'll have my life ruined. I'll go to prison for 8 years and lose all the opportunities I would have otherwise. And it all got resolved, and it's a long story. But the point being that at that point already, it was a line in the sand where I just thought, whatever I do in my life, I don't feel like I can invest too deeply into material pursuits. They just felt too fragile. They felt too fleeting, like it can be stolen from me at any moment. And so I started to take my spiritual path more seriously. And at this point, I was 17. Okay. And so when I finished high school at 18, I called my guru and I asked him, so what's the plan? Should I go to university? And he said, yeah. But take a gap year. Come to the ashram for a year and then you can go to university. I went to the ashram. I never left.
Usually the case.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then as I moved into the ashram, ashram life consumes you. Then you start to go into the flow, prayers every day and being with the devotees and events and service, and it's just a whole nother world, right? Being in the temple. And then I started to really, 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 really become ambitious in spiritual life. I wanted to serve the best. I wanted to be thought of as the best. I wanted all sorts of very ego-driven things. But it was very clear to me that I had this ambition inside of me from before, and it just sort of carried on into the spiritual life.
Right. Wow.
And I remember one day I went to an event with one of the Swamis at the ashram, and we went to, it was in Munich, and we met Radhanath Swami and some other people there, and we had a chat with him. And the Swami I was with at the time, obviously he conducted the conversation. I was his junior, but I remember watching this thinking, I can do it better. Arrogant, very arrogant, but I was thinking, I can do this better. I just feel like he's not doing a good job. He's not representing how I would represent. And I left that event and I came home and I was sure I'm going to go knock on my guru's door and I'm going to ask him to become a Swami today. Wow. And I did. I went and I knocked and I said, can you make me a Swami, please? Because I
want to wait to be a Swami.
Yeah.
It didn't happen that time.
Impatient
okay.
He didn't
It
say
didn't
yes.
happen.
He didn't say yes. No, there wasn't the right motivation.
Right.
I kind of went up to him and I said, yeah, because I just feel like I'm tired of the red tape that forbids me from doing certain services because I'm not a Swami and I have to be a junior to this one or that one.
Yeah.
And I just wanted the green light to do whatever, whenever. And, in our community, sometimes the sannyasis have more possibilities to do this kind of thing than others. Depends on time and place, but generally. Right? And I remember him smiling at me and just being like, yeah, no, absolutely not. Not for those reasons. You're not ready. Who knows? Maybe one day, but not like this.
How old were you at this time?
23, maybe.
Okay. Wow.
And then fast forward a couple years. And in those 2 years, I decided to really sort of commit myself to qualifying myself as much as I could. So I was lecturing, I was teaching, I was really focusing on philosophy and whatever else, because I thought, well, externally, those are the skills I can work on. Internally, character is something else, but externally, at least that much I can do. And 2 years after that, he came up to me and said, you still have that wish? I said, sure do. And it was arranged, right? So 25, got initiated as a Swami.
And it's in Bhakti Marga, there's those who wear yellow.
Yeah, those are the
Then there's
brahmacharis.
those who wear red, and then there's who's wear orange.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? a little bit?
Sure. So the yellows are the brahmacharis. So the brahmacharis, they take their vows of celibacy for the period in which they're brahmacharis. I think it's very similar in ISKCON. And they're not expected to progress to Swamihood or anything like this. It's choice. It has to be approved by Guruji. It's not, so Guruji chooses who he makes sannyasis. It's not that you go and say, I submit a request to be a sannyasi, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Because the Swamis in Bhakti Marga are seen as like his direct representatives, right? And so it's something that he personally has to choose. I was a little weird by asking for it. Normally we don't ask, but whatever.
How many Swamis are there?
Ooh, good question. At the moment, I think we're at 30 something.
Oh,
Can't tell
okay.
you the exact number, but 30 something around the world. Yeah. The rishis are a far smaller group because the rishis actually, it's an intermediary phase. So the rishis are people who are brahmacharis that Gurudev's sort of identified as swamis in training. So like for the future, they will be swamis. And they accept, of course, this. And so they wear the red to sort of distinguish that they are training to become sannyasis, to become swamis, such as Jagopal.
Yes, wow.
Cool. Swami in training.
Right. And so the orange are swamis.
Right.
It's very
Sannyasis,
interesting that that's defined as a stage, and
Yeah.
there's actually kind of a group of devotees who are
Because-
in this intermediary stage, and it's identified within the organization.
Yeah, you know why we do it? I think, I mean, I can't say 100% why because I don't have access to his mind, Guruji's, but one of the reasons I understand and I know why it works is because it gives them the chance to have some of the opportunities that are usually meant for the sannyasi. So they give lectures in a more prominent way and do other things like this. They can initiate devotees, but without the expectation and the burden of sort of expectation that we put on the sannyasis and swamis to be of a certain standard and to be our spiritual mentors. Like they don't do that kind of thing. So they don't go around giving spiritual advice to people and mentoring them and being like real guides. They just sort of like, we come, we lecture, we can do the initiation. And so you gradually warm up to it and you get to a phase where you can really transition.
And the initiation, they're disciples of that person or of the Guru of
No,
Guruji?
of Gurudev. So it's
interesting.
because he's still here with us, right?
Right.
Then there's the proxy system.
Yes.
Once he's gone, we'll see what happens. What he wants to do with that.
Very interesting.
Whether we go down the
Because
Ritvik road or not.
Oh, you know about that?
Of course.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know how much you know about ISKCON. And do you have, I know Prithu is a
Right.
mutual friend of ours, but what has been your exposure to ISKCON or Gaudiya Vaishnavism?
I think it's really hard if you're trying to become, let's say, knowledgeable in the field of Vaishnavism to not bump into ISKCON literature and ISKCON concepts and ideas and personalities and whatever else. And
Yeah.
I have been exposed to a lot of it. I have a lot of friends who are also in ISKCON. It's not, just Prithu.
Right.
So yeah, I would say I'm quite familiar. Obviously not ins and outs of what it is to be an ISKCON devotee and all
Right.
those kind of dynamics. But from the outside looking in, I mean, philosophically, I'm quite aware. Just from my work, I primarily teach philosophy and
Yes.
deal with that kind of thing. And so obviously I'm just out of curiosity and out of necessity, I have to know what is out there. And
Yeah.
so in that sense, I know quite a bit. But
Some of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode was because to understand Bhakti Marg and the philosophy and kind of I know we have a lot of similarities, but we also have like tons of differences, but also to have to show that like we can have these differences, but also we can have a really good conversation and try to understand each other, try to learn. Dina made a good point. Why don't you, before you came, Swami, we were talking about
Nam
it.
and I were just reflecting a little bit and just sharing about how it's so important to be able to have these conversations because although we may differ philosophically in different ways, we have a lot to learn from each other. There's a lot that we can share in inspiration, right? So by hearing from you, I can become inspired, in my own, you can say, in my own path. And, vice versa, we can inspire each other on our paths, even if they don't bear, exact resemblance to each other. There's so much to take, even from not only speaking philosophy together or anything like that, but also just in the example. So in the example, like hearing about you, such dedication to your Gurudev, that can inspire me also in my aspiring to be a good disciple, so on and so forth.
I mean, I 100% agree with that sentiment. I try to do the same thing on my podcast. The thing is also, one of the things that Guruji always told me, to really be inspired by saintly persons, irrespective of their religion. So I'm not even talking Vaishnavas.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
This sort of demonization that sometimes exists towards, saintly persons from different philosophies or sampradayas or whatever, or even different religions. I don't subscribe to that at all. Because I think even if I don't agree with their philosophy, I mean, some of these like, let's say Christian saints or whoever it may be, their dedication is insane. Or like you read about their life and the humility they had or the detachment or whatever it may be. And I can look at that and say, if I cannot be inspired by that, if I can't extract that as a worthy example to be followed in some sense, then something's gone wrong up here, right? Where I just create such division to the point where I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater in a sense. And I think that there's no merit to that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I definitely wanted to put that as the foundation of our conversation. So in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there's a Achintya Bheda Veda Tattva, right? So in Bhakti Marg, what is the main, you could say, tenet?
So because Guruji was originally initiated into the Sri Sampradaya, right? But because he has his own realizations and his own sort of spiritual tattva darshana in a sense, he sees reality from his own perspective. I would say that it was dishonest for us to ever sit there and say, yeah, we are 100% Sri Vaishnavas. Because it wasn't true. Yeah, we had some similarities again and some things that differ. And they just thought, well, the cleanest thing would be to own that, even if it is controversial and if it's not going to be widely congratulated and accepted, like make our own sampradaya, right? Where we can honor that distinction and be blunt about that distinction and then just have it become eventually its own thing, right? And it's not that there isn't precedent for that type of thing, right? There is in many different instances. And so what we're doing right now is we're taking the Vasishtadvaita of Ramanuja as a foundation, and we are identifying where it is that we have the points of disagreement, or at least points of where we tweak things to emphasize something a little different. And so right now, actually, we're in the process of writing a Siddhanta book, in a sense, that will really clarify our position. So it's a work in progress, I would say. I don't think something like a Vedanta can be just cooked up in a short amount of time and say, oh yeah, here's a solid philosophy. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's we're using the working title of Tadatmya Vedanta. The idea being that where we're emphasizing let's put it like this, the capacity for two separate entities to identify as one whilst remaining two, to describe the nature of the love of relationship with God. So the devotee and God get so absorbed in one another that it's as if to the devotee only God exists, to God only the devotee exists, but factually two always exist. So it's not Advaita in the sense that one reality exists, but rather that it is almost like an experiential Advaita, but in Bhakti. And it's got
That's
nuance
similar
to it.
to Achintya Bheda Veda.
It is. That's what I mean. It's really, but so is Vasishtadvaita in a sense. Ramanuja's philosophy is also very similar to the point where it's just emphasis. What are you emphasizing?
Right.
That makes the distinctions. But actually, there's not a huge degree of difference. If you go to someone like Madhva Sampradaya, okay, fine. There we have a bigger distinction with Dvaita.
Tell us more about the emphasis specifically in Bhakti Marga, like, and how does that affect the practice or whatever?
Yes. So two things I'll say first of all. Guruji, one of the things he's noticed throughout his life, let's say, is how divisive Vaishnavism has become. And what I mean by that is how much there's infighting, right, between the Sampradayas and within the Sampradayas even, not even across Sampradaya borders.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
For sure.
And I'm sure you guys know about that.
If you're going on the street and there's another Gaudiya coming, you cross over.
Not bad.
It's a joke.
No, but that's kind of the point, right? And so he looks at that, and as maybe ambitious or utopian as it is, he's sort of saying, well, let's make a sampradaya situation where we can adopt principles or elements of all the sampradayas to some extent, or at least keep our boundaries very loose and open to accommodate as much diversity as possible without sacrificing core principles. Right? So we'll have Varkari saints that worship Vittala in Maharashtra. Vittala is a form of Krishna. We'll have Sri Vaishnava influences. If you go into our temple in Germany, we have, as soon as you walk into the temple, there's a mural of the 6 Goswamis, for example.
Wow.
Right?
Interesting.
So we worship Radha on the altar, which again Sri Vaishnavas wouldn't do. And so just trying to blend as much from the landscape of Vaishnavism as possible in terms of worship, not necessarily in terms of philosophy, right? Because I think there is a distinction to be made. How you put these pieces together sort of cosmologically or philosophically is one thing, but understanding that the various forms of God or the various abodes of God or whatever can be viewed in a non-hierarchical sense, because I think one of the issues is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in, for example, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Goloka Vrindavan is the supreme abode.
Yes.
Right? Okay. For you go to Sri Vaishnavism, they'll say, not really.
Yes.
Vaikuntha.
Vaikuntha.
Right? then some will mitigate that and saying, well, it's the Vaikuntha planets and it's general region, but still there's a hierarchical situation in that region, right? And so what Guruji is saying is, from his perspective, that's not the case. It's neither hierarchical, nor one nor the other. If you see Vaikuntha as a borderline undefinable realm because it is beyond time and space and we're using material language to describe that place. Yes. And rather than defining it as a sort of spiritual Disneyland, right, let's leave it a bit more abstract to the point of saying it's an abode where these different chambers exist. So there is the Goloka chamber, so to speak, for those who are devotees of that lila or that mood. But the other chambers also exist, and it's not that one is superior to the other. So we don't create hierarchy neither in the abodes, nor in the forms, nor in the moods. So even saying something like Madhurya is superior to Aishwarya or something like that,
Right.
we won't
Not
go down
there,
that road.
Not there.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So the point we'll say is love, whether it's in a motherly way or a brotherly way or a romantic way or whatever it may be. Each has its like absolute glory, and we will glorify it and allow for that.
Yeah.
But we're not putting in a hierarchical situation. And so there are some pitfalls because you have a more divided community, because you're not all aiming for the same thing. Because some will say, I want Madhurya, and others will say, that's not my thing. And they will both coexist in the same sampradaya and the same philosophy.
Right.
And so it could be much easier and much simpler, not only for us as a community, but to disseminate to others if we would just have, no, that's number one, that's the form of God you should be worshiping, and this is the mood you should be worshiping in. So we are, in a sense, it's a double-edged sword. We're opening that up and saying many forms, many moods, not better or worse, go for it. So more open, but more dispersed in some sense as well.
Very interesting, Swami. It brings up one question for me. Basically wondering, are these kind of different yearnings that devotees may carry within their hearts, their kind of ultimate spiritual yearning, which, as you're saying, according to this understanding that's being given, that corresponds with the ultimate kind of spiritual destination of each bhakta, right? According to their love, their
Yes.
yearning. So I was just wondering, within community then, is there space for those different yearnings to be discussed, or is it something that's more kind of held, personally within each person?
Good question.
Yeah, no, there is, but it tends to be that the people who have similar yearnings tend to group together, right?
Even unspoken, just happens.
Yeah. And then when it gets spoken out, it gets sort of reaffirmed and confirmed in that direction. And I think Guruji, when he's asked questions and when he gives satsang and people can ask him questions and stuff, you'll often find from one satsang to the next, he'll take a completely different tone or a completely different direction because he's accommodating the various different moods that his own disciples have. And so again, his satsang becomes more dispersed as a result. You can hear him one time and think, oh, that's what he teaches. And then you'll hear him another time and it's something different. And you go, again, not at core principles, not at core levels, right? But at the periphery, right? It can be quite varied in that sense. So it looks a little chaotic. It looks a little weird even, right? What is it that they actually do? Yeah. Do they worship Narayana? Do they worship Krishna? Are they worshiping Vittala? What's going on?
Yeah.
But it's really that. It's trying to be as accommodating as possible to all forms of Vaishnavas. That's why he called it Hari Bhakta Sampradaya. So any Bhakta of Hari, in any form of Hari, is accommodated in some sense.
Have you got pushback from traditional sampradayas at all?
Yes. But then I also push back on the notion of traditional Sampradaya.
Right. I know. I've watched the podcast about that. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, look, to put it very bluntly, of course, because people have been, have adopted this idea quite firmly, and right or wrong is not my point, but that there are four Sampradayas and they have their set ways. And if you want to do something legitimate, then you conform to these four Sampradayas. You can do something outside of that, but then accept being called illegitimate. Right? This is somehow the general tone that it takes.
Right.
And so the pushback, if it's just on that basis, or you're illegitimate because you don't conform to these four, I think it's a very superficial pushback, and therefore I don't really have much to say on that. What I just cite history, because history shows me enough that this four Sampradaya rigid format isn't true, historically speaking, but maybe we won't go into that right now. If the pushback is philosophical, if the pushback is more nuanced, and it's not about, oh, you've created a new Sampradaya, that's terrible, but actually let me speak to specific points, then of course.
That's a deeper dialogue.
Sure,
to have.
we can engage,
Sure.
and there I'm absolutely ready to listen with open ears and open heart.
Yeah.
It's a very different point.
What about you're talking about people in Bhakti Marga can have different aims as a Goloka Vrindavan, or moods rather. So is there a unifying kind of goal, like there is in Gaudiya Vaishnavism? Krishna Prema is the goal, and the way to get to that goal is by the practices of bhakti, devotional service, chanting, hearing, all those Shravanam Kirtan, all that stuff. Can you tell us more about if there's similarities there?
In that sense, is actually I think where we have the most similarity, because for us, yes, the goal is prem, and I wouldn't go to say Krishna Prem. You could, as a sort of overall umbrella category, you can call it Hari Prem or Narayana Prem, but Prem nonetheless, for sure. And the method would be bhakti. 9 forms of bhakti, whatever it may be. Like that's absolutely the sadhana that we will do. Again, there, looking from the outside, sometimes we'll do some yogic practices. So we have one of our sadhanas that we do is also like a form of Kriya Yoga.
Yes.
But it's not done in the traditional sense. So if you were to go, for example, and take Kriya Yoga from somewhere like SRF, Yogananda, it's not the same. So our Kriya Yoga is linked to each form of bhakti, and it's being done for the intention of bhakti. So you're doing it as a sort of communion with Paramatma or with Bhagavan inside the heart. So it's the whole mentality or intention of it is a bit different. It's not about just knowing the self, isolating the self from material nature, nothing like that. It's bhakti centered, even though it is a yogic practice. And so again, until you do it, or at least you're taught it, even if you don't practice it, then you understand what the intention behind it is. But the general life of a Bhakti Marga devotee, sadhana-wise, chanting. We chant all day, kirtan, worship in the temples, puja. There's quite an emphasis on puja, actually.
Yes,
likes
I've noticed that, yeah.
He likes very much. And maybe that's the South Indian influence, Sri Vaishnava influence as well. Yeah. So we do a lot of puja, temples being opened everywhere. And the devotees are encouraged to do personal puja as well. So we take our personal deities at home and do full abhishekams and puja, like as a main form of worship also.
Right.
But chanting is a must for all the initiated devotees as well. So in the end, practically speaking, we're studying scripture, we're giving talks, listening to Shastra, Shravanam Kirtanam, worshipping forms, Archana Bhakti. It's really not all that different.
Very similar.
In that sense.
Very similar.
So that emphasis on the practices of bhakti, and then also the kind of seemingly the practices that are seemingly disparate from bhakti, you're saying they're really filtered through the lens of bhakti.
They're only done as sort of supports to bhakti, right? And actually, when you study something like Shandilya Bhakti Sutra, so why that's interesting, even if it's more of a peripheral text, but Shandilya Bhakti Sutra, Sage Shandilya, he talks about what can be classified as bhakti or not. And one of the things he says is that you can have primary bhakti and secondary bhakti. And secondary bhakti is essentially any practice that promotes the practice of bhakti or facilitates the practice of bhakti. Right. And so we'll introduce things like Kriya Yoga from that mentality that this is like a secondary bhakti that promotes conventional bhakti in some sense, right?
Okay.
So it's not done for any other motive.
Yeah. Thank you.
In regards to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we have like a lineage of acharyas who we get a lot of literature and things from, and that's kind of shaped our parampara, so to say. So for Bhakti Marga, since it's quite a young parampara, you could say, I mean, it's just starting now. So where do most of the practices and influences come from Guruji himself?
Well, it's an excellent point. I think sometimes we compare apples and oranges in this case, right? Because, for example, something like the Hare Krishna movement, you're right, you're absolutely further down the line, let's say, of a parampara situation where you have several acharyas, you have centuries worth of literature and practices and whatever else tradition to rely on. But if you were to go back to Mahaprabhu's time, it's a beginning. Because even if you took initiation in Madhva Sampradaya, it's not like we were suddenly practicing Madhva Sampradaya teachings and practices per se. The philosophy was different. Chintya Bheda Veda's got very little to do with Dvaita Vedanta of Madhva.
Right.
So we're kind of in that situation, right? So what do we do? I would say, if I had to give a percentage to it, in terms of the sadhanas and practices that we do, they are molded by Guruji, but they are not invented by Guruji, if that makes sense. So the deity worship is Pancharatra Agama. Right. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it will be done in a flavor, like Bhakti Marga flavor. Everywhere you go and see a puja, it's done slightly different.
Sure.
You go to an ISKCON temple, you see a puja, it looks a bit different. You go to Shiva Vaishnava temple, it looks a bit different. You go somewhere else, it looks a bit different. So something like that will always be there, like a little spice, a little flavor to change it. The kirtan, same. some spices there. He'll make his own songs or compose something like this. The mantra we chant, for example, this is coming from him. So the mantra we chant when we do our japa is a mantra that he, let's say, received or gave to us. So in that sense, yeah, it's not coming from a parampara. It's initiated by him, and he gave it to us, and we chanted.
Right.
See, beyond that, I would say it's pre-existing things just colored by him.
Yes.
Yeah. Nothing really, in a sense, invented, just fine-tuned.
So what you're bringing up is very compelling. I'm just wondering, please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm mischaracterizing this.
Sure.
But it seems that within Bhakti Marga, there is a little bit less pressure, like internal pressure to kind of link your present practices to a kind of precedented line or lineage or history, anything like that. And there's a lot more space to accept and embrace the revelation that is coming from your Guruji.
Yes, that is absolutely. I don't think you're mischaracterizing it at all.
Okay.
I think that's correct. Because, and again, I am assuming, but from even my sort of historical reading, I don't think it's that different to many sampradayas. And I'm not focusing now on even Gaudiya Sampradaya, but if you take a lot of the sampradayas and you go back to the time of its founder, for that first generation of devotees who are following the founder, most of them are relying on the revelation or teaching of the acharya who's giving it. And the acharya will reference previous gurus to some extent. He'll reference scripture to some extent, but it's also his own tattva darshana. It's also his own perception of the supreme reality that is coloring the need for another sampradaya. Because if the acharyas come and 100% regurgitate what has been said before, there would be no new sampradaya ever emerging. There would only have ever been one. So the fact that there are even four shows that there are different things to be said about the topic. There are different angles to be taken about it. And I think that's noticeable when you really go down to the founding phase, let's say, of these sampradayas, or at least when the acharyas put down their philosophy. You can see how much their perspective on things, their interpretation of things, because, for example, you can take the same Bhagavad Gita, but by the fact that there are four sampradayas, the four acharyas interpreted the same text differently. So when we sort of applaud them and say, well, they have followed something traditional, it's like, yeah, but they did it in their own way. So they have taken a text that is universally accepted by all Vaishnavas, but they've still put their lens at it. They've looked at it through their lens of realization and come up with their Siddhanta. And so we can look at that and say, well, that's a more traditional format, but actually we're doing the same thing. My guru is looking at the Bhagavad Gita and saying, well, here's my interpretation of it based on my perception of reality.
Right.
And you could argue how much of Ramanuja's perception, for example, was informed by his gurus at the time, by Yamunacharya and others. Truth is, not much, because his guru was an Advaitin when he was growing up. And he was already inherently refuting the Advaitin guru because from his own perception, he felt this is wrong. I see things differently. But it wasn't because he had been taught by some parampara that told him to think differently. He had his own realizations, and then he refuted it, and then almost complemented his realizations with statements from Vaishnava acharyas that he connected to later on to form his Siddhanta. And so I find that to be organic and natural and real, and then everything that's followed since then are just people who agree with Ramanuja's point of view in the Ramanuja Sampradaya. Right? So the same goes on elsewhere. So the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, to me, are people who agree with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's vision of reality, right? And if not, then why would you be a Gaudiya Vaishnava? So, in some sense. Now the question is, to me, I would say, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu following a parampara when he speaks? Is he teaching what has been taught before? To me, partially yes, partially no. In some sense, he was following what already existed, and in some sense, he was giving something a little different and a little new, giving more tools or giving something a little...
Like the emphasis was a little different.
Right. And that's why I sometimes try to disarm the whole uncomfortableness with something new, because really it's just emphasizing different things and tweaking different things. It's not reinvention. So when I look at what Guruji is doing in our case in Bhakti Marga, sometimes people, our own devotees sometimes mischaracterize us more than anybody else. So
Really?
our own devotees,
That's very interesting.
Yeah, because they have, people like to be new and different sometimes in any field of life.
Yeah,
they
of
like
course.
to be revolutionary
They wanna be
and
unique.
be exciting and unique.
Yeah.
And sometimes they come to me and they're like, oh, because we're doing something revolutionary here. And I look at them and I'm like, are we though? No, but really, like please tell me what it is that we're doing that's so revolutionary. We can be maybe reforming one or two things or iterating one or two things, but revolutionary is far too strong of a word. We're taking established things and giving a slightly different perspective on them, or rather compiling things that haven't been put together before and attempting to make it cohesive. That might be true, but it's not it's not inventing anything particularly new, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
One or two instances, as I said with the mantra, for example, but on a big scale.
On a big scale, there's still a lot of traditionalism there. Yeah. And it's interesting, because I feel also often within Gaudiya teachings or Gaudiya dialogue, for sure, things can be characterized as revolutionary, right? We'll speak about the kirtan revolution, things of that nature. So the thing is, I'm not to say that it isn't revolutionary. It may have a very revolutionary effect on the society. But it's almost a case of what's old is new, in the sense that we're going against the kind of Kali Yuga norms now. So in that context, it's revolutionary.
No, I agree with that. That's good.
No, but what you say is also true, that it's something that it's not completely novel. It's something that is drawing from far, far back, but maybe in the present day context, it has this revolutionary
impact
quality,
or effect
impact.
Or whatever. Yeah, you're right. It's maybe novel ways of presenting it or novel ways of compiling it, but it's not, too novel in of itself.
I didn't know that. That's good clarification. That there are, it's like different practices that are traditional, but they might have not been put together in the past. But now with Bhakti Marga, they have been put together in the past, and now and you're saying to make it cohesive and to make it work somehow.
And that's the challenge. Right?
That's the challenge. Yeah.
Look, and this is the thing. I can completely empathize with anybody looking from the outside and thinking, this looks like just some mishmash of new things. Right? I completely empathize. Right. But the point is that, and this is, I'm glad to be able to clarify this. He is taking bits and pieces from traditional lines of thought, traditional sampradayas or practices or whatever else, that have value in them and are very good, and there's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. And instead of saying, only do this, to the point that somebody might start criticizing everything that is not this, he says, let's do this. And my challenge, him as Guruji, is to make this all not confuse you, to make this all cohesive and workable in a sense. That's it.
How has he been doing that, what you're saying, to make it not confusing? Yeah. Because it could easily be confusing, right?
Yeah. By emphasizing that which unites and de-emphasizing that which divides. And practically speaking, it means he'll pick up saints from the Gaudiya tradition, he'll pick up saints from the Sri Sampradaya and different places, and then he'll extract from that life story, for example, or from their practices, something that can also be extracted from the other, and that is always bhakti. It's always the surrender. It's always the behavioral elements much more than the philosophical elements. So if you simply divorce the philosophy from it, and again, it's easier said than done, but if you do that, if you strip away like someone, I was talking to a Gaudiya Vaishnava once, who remained nameless, and we were talking about Mirabai, right? And I couldn't get him to say a positive word about Mirabai.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I couldn't get him to do it, and I was pushing. Really, not one thing you can say. He's like, philosophically, she was deviant, right? And I said, look, that may be the case, and I'm not saying this all Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Don't mischaracterize me now. But the point was, all I'm doing here is saying I don't care about her philosophy to some extent. It's not to dismiss, but I don't care all that much. But to say that there's nothing to be praised there, I don't know that I can ever do.
I can't get on board with that either.
Me neither.
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah. That's really just it's the mentality of looking for the negatives.
I know where that stems from.
I'm curious.
So one of our main recent acharyas, who is a godbrother of Srila Prabhupada, he had said something about Mirabai, that something along the lines of, I don't want to misspeak it, but it was basically like, it was just her and Krishna. She would always sing about her and Krishna, but Krishna's with there's so many people with Krishna, and it should be like, our philosophy is Gopi Bhartu Padikamira Das Anudas. So like,
right.
When it's just you with Krishna and you're singing about that, then that's not exactly the philosophy that we go by. So then I could see someone who is like immature to take that statement that came from that devotee, that
Yeah.
acharya, and say, okay, now we're just fully saying that Mirabai is bogus.
Right,
Yes.
bogus. Yeah.
So
That's the word
it's
that also came to mind.
It's just it's an immature interpretation of something that a recent acharya said. So now that kind of spreads apart, and like, okay, now everyone thinks that Mirabai is bogus. But what I agree, I can't get on board with that because it's so nuanced, like that. What you can't say something nice, and you only want to say what you heard, and which was a negative thing.
Yeah.
Right, right. When you have someone who's dedicated their life and soul to connecting with the Supreme, even if it's in a different flavor or a different mood, it's very hard to just
Not
completely.
even the optimal way that you would recommend
Right.
someone doing it, but like nobody can deny that she clearly loved Krishna.
Yeah, exactly.
She wouldn't have lived the life she did if she didn't.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And
it's-
so to vilify someone like that, or to not even be able to praise, I find that that's gone too far. Right?
How did we
Maybe
get to that point?
Because I was saying how he helps to
Oh, okay. You're taking
solve
the
that
charge.
issue
Yes,
of
yes.
the differences, right?
Right, right.
And so I was saying, so in the case of someone like Mirabai, he won't necessarily pay attention so much to the methodology or philosophy of her life, but more
Yes.
look at that love, look at the dedication, read her poems.
Right.
Wonderful. And by doing that, and then doing the same principle, applying the same principle to Jiva Goswami, for example, and then applying the same principle to Vedanta Deshika or someone like this,
Yeah.
you just start to go, okay, I have naturally found commonality here in the sense that I can extract inspiration from all of them.
Yeah.
That inspiration can now inform my behavior, inform my life, guide my life. But how am I actually going to do it? Through the lens of my guru's philosophy. So I take philosophy from one source, not from many. And that's the key factor here. If you take teaching from everywhere, you'll get a mess. Right? So if you take the example from everywhere, you won't get a mess. If you filter that example through your teaching. So you have one philosophy and methodology from your guru, from your sampradaya, so to speak, and then you take all the examples of the exemplary personalities in the other sampradayas and then try to emulate them through the methodology and philosophy that you're practicing.
Yeah.
And there's plenty you can extract from those people.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like I know devotees who are really inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi.
Right.
It's
Me too.
similar concept. Like, yeah. And so what he symbolized and his teachings were, like, we can use those things like humility and renunciation and all those things but use it in our own.
But you see, the thing is, imagine someone does that. Now Swami gets on stage and he's giving a talk and he says, let's talk about Francis of Assisi.
Right.
There will always be a group who will say, look what's going on. Now we're talking about Christian saints.
Here we
Yeah.
You know, look at this nonsense. And that's
Yes.
that's the problem.
Yes.
That's the problem. And so that's why I'm saying I can understand someone having exactly that reaction looking at what we're doing, because they'll be like, today they're talking about Shiva, tomorrow it's Narayana, tomorrow it's what is going on there.
Yeah,
What a
yeah.
mess. So the nuance lies in understanding what is being attempted here. We're not preaching worship of St. Francis of Assisi now,
Yeah,
or that
right.
his philosophy is what we should all practice. Nothing to do with that whatsoever. Christian philosophy, Christian theology. I don't want to sit here and offend anybody, but it's not the greatest, right? But that's not what we're preaching.
Yes.
When we say St. Francis is a great man, St. Francis is somebody that you all can learn from as Vaishnavas, right?
Yeah.
And why dismiss somebody like that? When if you accept him, not only do you accept him, but you also open a door to all the people who already have affection for him to feel like maybe this could be a home for me too.
Definitely.
Because I'll tell you one thing, the amount of people that have come to our path that would never have been attracted by a pure Vaishnava presentation. Because they're like, it's culturally so distant from me.
Interesting.
But because I heard your guru speak about Jesus or St. Francis or whomever it may be,
Yeah.
it drew me in long enough to listen, and I listened long enough to get the real message here of love for God. And I've gradually been able to put down my walls against Vaishnavism and Krishna and the Indian elements, and now I'm fine with it.
Right. This syncretic element that can sometimes be there actually allows more people to feel included.
And the challenge there is not to just dilute it so much in the name of sort of being eclectic that it just becomes a mishmash of random things with nothing real of substance at the end of the day. Because there are people who will do that. All paths are the same. All religions are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not saying that at all. But there is a middle ground there. You don't have to go 0 to 100, where it's like only this path, nothing else is good, or it's all the same. And there's a middle ground where we say there's lots of good in the others, and let's use that good within our framework.
What do you attribute the very quick growth of Bhakti Marga do you attribute it with like that kind of philosophy, like that we are, you know, very open, we're getting, you know, seeing love in all these different places, bringing it in, or is it something else? Is it Guruji, or like what is it?
I think there's two or three things, and I think there's some pitfalls too. I'll speak on those. I think firstly it's Guruji, because he is alive, he's here, he's incredibly unique. I have never met somebody who met him and had no reaction, whether it's good or bad, but everybody has a reaction, right? He is just so different from what is there in a sense, and yet familiar to so many people that people feel like they can warm up to him even before they warm up to everything else, the philosophies and practices and teachings and everything else. So in that sense, very charismatic, and that comes with pros and cons. Right, because you get people who are very superficial or there for the wrong reasons or whatever. Right. But that is definitely a factor, and it's the number one factor, and I can't deny that. Right, him as a personality. Second, yes, the philosophy helps, because by virtue of being as wide as it is, more fish fall in the net in a sense. Right. However, and here's one of the pitfalls where I think, for example, someone like ISKCON has an advantage over what we do in some sense. Getting them to become deep and profound in what we're doing takes more work. Because if somebody can get into what we're doing on the basis of just loving Mirabai, right? Or something like on the periphery or on the fringes of what we're presenting, and to get them to that core is very difficult, right? And because we introduce so many different practices, so somebody comes and they're like, oh, I practiced Kriya Yoga with Yogananda. I'd love that you guys also have Kriya Yoga. Let me do some Kriya Yoga. Yeah. That's cool. But to then transition that into, I want to surrender my life at the feet of Sriman Narayana and chant his name all day, is a leap. That's right. Wow. It's a distance, distance to cover. ISKCON, you know, if you're a beginner or you're the most expert devotee, you're just chanting Hare Krishna. Yes. Right? Yes. And that's actually really helpful in a sense, because your transition from point A to point B, even though there's plenty of depth to be achieved on the path, but it's not all that different. It's familiar. So when you look at the experienced devotee, he resembles the novice in some sense, because you're doing the same thing just to a higher degree. Right? Whereas for us, sometimes you'll meet somebody at the periphery that looks just completely different to what's going on at the core, you know, by virtue of being so open. Right, and so accepting of different things. And so yes, we're growing a lot, and I'm very happy about that, right, as someone who's obviously contributing to that and working towards that. I'm very happy about that. But the big challenge now is not just to grow in numbers, but lacking quality. You want the same quality and depth across the board, and that's a challenge, because actually I had a conversation with Guruji. We were in Jaipur some months back, and he turns to me and he said, isn't it amazing? Every town you go to, there's an ISKCON temple. And I said, it is amazing. And he said, how did they do it? And I said, clarity. Because I think they're very clear. And he's like, good point. So they're very clear in the sense of what's their mantra, what's their practice, what's their deity of worship, what's their identity in a sense, right? Now, I'm not saying that there is a nuance to that. You guys can tell me much better than I can look at it from the outside, but it appears to be a very clear religious movement in some sense, right? And I said, Guruji, look at us. And he said, what do you mean? Like, he almost looked as if I was going to offend, you know, in some way. And I said, but just look at us. You can see 10 Bhakti Marga devotees and you'll see 10 different tilaks even. And he said, and he smiled and he said, well, like as if to say almost, that's the cost you pay for being as diverse and open as we are, right? But then the conversation went on to the point where he said, eventually I will rein things in a little bit, right? In the sense of, you know, you can be more accommodating in the early stages, and then eventually we will settle on something a little more uniform in some sense. And it actually just happened a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, he wrote, like, he made a communication to the Sangha in general, like saying, as much as I like that you guys like to wear different kinds of tilaks, like, just please let's stick to one with one color, and that's interesting. Okay, so
this
you know
is a
what I
recent
mean?
Development.
Yeah. So, but this is a good example of the difficulty, the challenges, because we'll have ex-Gaudiyas who will come, for example, and then they'll do their tilak which is basically the same as the Gaudiya Tilak, and they'll just put a red line in the middle, just to say, okay, we're kind of conforming.
Yeah.
And then we'll have Sri Vaishnavas who will come with the big fat white tilak and put the red and say, we're also conforming.
Yeah.
And then we'll have some from Maharashtra, the devotees of Vittala, and they wear like black sometimes, like a different shape even. So there's just such a mess sometimes, right? In allowing so much to come in.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're growing a lot, but the challenge is to steer that growth into the funnel, in a sense, leading them towards depth, because we want to make real devotees of God, surrendered devotees of God, not just numbers for the sake of numbers. Nobody wants that.
That's a really interesting point you made, that if someone is attracted by some peripheral thing, to get them to come to like the committed, and accept everything, it's like a big jump. Well, I mean, what you said about ISKCON, I think that's correct and accurate, that it's a little bit more like clear in what we want to do.
Things are fairly clear cut. And as you said, Swami, there may be nuance within that, from practitioner to practitioner, people having different moods or perhaps different emphases that they focus on. But yeah, absolutely. That at least initially it's very clear cut that everyone's kind of doing the same thing.
And there's great strength to that.
What about like regulative principles? Like in ISKCON, we have 4 regulative principles, and to become an initiated devotee, you have to adhere to those. You have to chant 16 rounds of the Maha Mantra. Is there anything similar in Bhakti Marga?
Yeah, so we have our own regulative principles as well. Very similar. Okay, very similar. But again, slightly adapted. This was actually something that I don't know if this episode will ever come out. I spoke to Hridayananda Goswami about this topic, about regulative principles.
Oh, interesting.
Because I recorded an episode with him.
Yes.
Some technical difficulties. Let's see if it actually comes out or not. But when we discussed this point, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because we were discussing what are the barriers to entry for people wanting to become devotees of Krishna.
Yes, good point. Good topic.
Great
and
topic.
Of course, he lent a lot on clothing and different things like that. But I also pushed on the subject of regulative principles. Because from my experience, if the aim is to have initiated devotees, because you could also just have devotees that are not initiated, but if your aim is initiated devotees, then the barrier of entry is the regulative principles. You don't become an initiated devotee unless you subscribe to this lifestyle as a vow, right?
Yeah.
And so I said to him that in some cultures, that's far more accessible than in others.
Yeah.
And the theory I have is that the better the country is, weather-wise, materially speaking, the less likely you will get people to commit to these vows. The reason being, to convince them that Maya is worth giving up is a lot harder. When they look outside and they see the sun shining and the beach is next to them and life is good. But if they're living in Eastern Europe, in Russia, or in cold winter of whatever temperature you have, and you tell them, renounce Maya, it's rubbish. They look outside the window and they go, yep, it is. I'm in. Is it a
really
shock
really
of how many Russian devotees there are in every Vaishnava movement walking this earth?
Even in Bhakti Marga?
Even in Bhakti Marga, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Really?
100%.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not, because this is the principle I'm putting forward.
No, you're speaking.
It's a cultural thing, because they have, and it's a geographical thing almost, because life there is not so good, so to speak. Go to LA, go to Brazil, and get them to join some kirtan party. Easy, they love the kirtan. Get them to stop drinking and stop eating meat and all this. Different conversation. And I'm Brazilian, so I'm not offending Brazilians by saying this.
Right.
It is very difficult to get the commitment to vows, right? I was traveling through Brazil some years ago, and I went through different missions. Bhakti Marga temple, then I went to ISKCON temple, I went to Vrinda temple at the time. I was going to different places. And it was sad. Because at every place, at least one person would come up to me and be, Swami, I need to talk to you. So many devotees here are struggling with drinking or with ayahuasca or with egg or with whatever it is. And, it's so, so difficult. And I never experienced that much difficulty in other types of climates and other types of countries as there is in these places. It's very culturally embedded. Yeah. Right? This kind of like enjoy life, consume hedonism sort of thing almost, right? So regulative principles are a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, they are what characterize the committed Vaishnava, and they guide us towards heights that we want to achieve, right? And it's necessary in some sense to renounce your senses. It's necessary to control yourself. It's necessary to say no to things. 100%. I'm not debating that for 1 second. But the real question is, how many of those things are you going to put at the first step of entry? And how many of those things could you perhaps delay to a later stage that they can aspire to gradually? So to answer your simple question. I complicated it. Sorry.
No,
So
no.
the regulative
really
principles that we have for the person to take initiation: vegetarian, no eggs, no alcohol, so no intoxication of any sort, smoking, drugs, all this kind of thing. Gambling is not something that we state as a rule. It's implied. I mean, we don't encourage it in any form whatsoever, but we're not putting it as like some kind of vow. We honestly just don't talk about it.
Right. There's not like hordes of people coming from the casino to become Bhakti Marga
Exactly.
devotees.
I think among practitioners who take these vows, that's the easiest one you can say.
For sure. And so we just kind of drop that. And then the other one, the real stickler is the illicit sex one.
Yes.
Right. So we have chosen not to make that as a criteria for initiation. Now, but we define illicit sex not as, because I was talking to Hridananda about this, and he said in his interpretation of illicit sex, it means no sex outside of marriage.
Right.
But once you're married, in the sense that you don't cheat on your partner in marriage, and that we agree with 100%. We're not advocating for freedom within marriage.
Yeah.
But we're saying we're open to the idea of sex before marriage, right? So somebody can have sexual encounters prior to getting married and still be a devotee, an initiated devotee. That's not an obstacle for initiation. And I don't know if everybody interprets it the same way, but
I think there's various interpretations. But I mean, Srila
what's the
Prabhupada
general
had
ISKCON one? Yeah.
The general is just that sex not for procreation is considered illicit sex. But then I've heard devotees say there's like the capital I or in the lowercase I, illicit, like within marriage, which something that is really, something I agree with. Like as long as it's like you're just sleeping around.
No, of
it's
course
like
not.
yeah.
Right.
So that's something that different ISKCON devotees say.
Cool. That's the sentiment. So I mean, the way we emphasize it, and this is something I think it's a general principle, and I like to emphasize this when I speak to devotees, prospective devotees, is categorize your life into three portions. There's the ideal, the permissible, and the prohibited.
Yeah.
And we try to keep the ideal as our compass, as our north, right? You make the permissible as wide as possible and the prohibited as narrow as possible. So the bigger the prohibited area is, the more problems you're going to have in life. The more problems you're going to have in your mission, the more problems you're going to have in preaching, in keeping healthy communities and everything. So
Say that again. The bigger the prohibited.
The bigger the prohibited area of conduct is, the more problems you're going to have.
Interesting.
And so you really want to, as a community, as a mission, keep that as small as possible without sacrificing who you really are.
Yeah.
Right? So the more rules you have, the more headaches you're going to have. The more difficulty you're going to have in people accepting what you're offering, because they have to sign up to so much more just to get something back, right?
Yeah.
And so, our line is drawn at the point of, no alcohol, no intoxication, all these things, but we're not going to make an issue of sex at this point, especially because society these days, it's very difficult to have conversations about that without being viewed as old-fashioned, regressive in some sense. And we're not doing away with principles. We're just delaying it, as I said. Ideally, no sense attachment whatsoever. Ideally, you don't do anything other than for the service of Krishna.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. But to think that that's what everybody actually does, let's be realistic, right? And so devotee initiation is such a precious thing, in my opinion. It is such a grace to get initiated by a genuine guru into a sampradaya, to get that grace.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't want to hide such a wonderful gift behind anything that I would deem to be relatively trivial. And so therefore, Guruji's stance at the point is that we have regulative principles, but we try to keep them as limited as possible. And then guide the devotees towards an ideal lifestyle through the satsang and the teachings and the community.
Right. I like that.
Right. Yeah.
In ISKCON, it's not exactly that's the first thing that people preach. Like when that new person comes.
Of course not.
Like and the barrier there definitely is that barrier to become initiated, but there's so many people like that never get initiated just because they don't want to.
They feel disqualified.
Yeah, they don't want, and I think it's okay that there's so many devotees in ISKCON that are not initiated and they just want to chant Hare Krishna. That's like the main, like when Srila Prabhupada came, he didn't like start with the 4 principles. He was just like, come under this tree and chant Hare Krishna with me. And then people were attracted to that.
And then he posted the notice.
Then he posted the notice of
at
this
26 2nd Avenue.
Yeah. The first temple that was in New York, that these are the rules that Hare Krishna should follow. And then people like fainted because it was like all these different rules to, you know,
Yeah.
and they what's this a story of some devotee who are like, oh, we're about to get initiated, but then they're like having coffee and donuts in the door next door or
So
something
actually,
like that.
It was. I think as far as the history goes, there was a period of time where the regulative principles were not as highly emphasized, but it was kind of a fairly quick reveal in the history of the movement.
Yeah.
But there was this, as you were saying, Swami, there may be this gradual reveal
Right.
where, those who are interested in coming, you don't want to dishearten them or discourage them.
Yeah.
And then at some point, the ideal is
Yeah,
Posted up.
it's like that. It's
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. I forgot one point actually. So when they get initiated, there are also other vows they take. So for example,
Oh, yeah, please
chanting,
tell us.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're talking
Yes.
about 16 rounds.
Yeah.
We used to do 16 rounds as well, but then so many people were just speeding through those 16 rounds, like just to get them done.
Just to get it done.
we
Right.
changed it to an hour. So you have to do minimum an hour a day.
An hour. It's
time-based.
time
That's
based.
so cool.
So you can
that's so
you can actually go
interesting, yeah.
slowly. You can do it like an absolute snail pace of
Right.
chanting. That doesn't matter.
But as long as it's an hour.
as long as it's an hour minimum, right? Because some people were doing the 16 rounds in like 30 minutes just to get it through, like just firing through it.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
We
get done.
struggle with that too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we
Everybody.
struggle with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm wondering also is that hour to be done in one sitting, or can it be broken up throughout the
broken
day?
up.
It can be broken up. Okay.
Yeah, because people who go to work and have kids and whatever
Yeah.
else, they're immediately like, okay, I'll do the hour, but can I just do like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes in my lunch break, 10 minutes? He's like, of course. Yeah.
So interesting.
So
Very
1 hour a
interesting.
day. 1 hour a day. Prior to initiation, there's also some other qualifiers as well. Like you have to know Guruji for at least 2 years. And the reason for that is because a lot of people would come to an event, fall in love with the whole thing, and say, I want to get initiated next
Initiate me
day.
now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
It's like,
yes.
no, sorry, we're not doing that, because
Right.
then they regret it, and then they say, oh, it wasn't what I really wanted, and now I've made all these promises. Because we believe that there is a karmic debt to be paid if you then sit there and backtrack from your vows and you break your vows. Because you've made a promise to God, you made a promise to your guru. You don't play with these things, and so we try to make it as serious as possible. So therefore, they have to know him for 2 years, and leading up to initiation, they have to have already been vegetarian for 1 year leading up to initiation. Because some people, they do the same thing. They go, oh, I'll stop smoking when I get initiated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they say, well, you don't know if you're able to. And you're going to make the promise without knowing that you're actually able to do that. And we had that in the past as well. We initiated people because they said, I promise I won't do it anymore. And then 1 month later, they're smoking, right? They said, I tried it, but I actually am not capable of giving it up.
Yeah.
So now we have like a preparatory phase where you prove to yourself. It's not proving to us, the initiators. You're proving to
I see.
yourself that you can carry out this lifestyle, and then you can responsibly come and say, I subscribe to this.
That's a healthy
So
way of viewing it.
You don't drink, you don't smoke, and you kind of already live the principles for a year leading up to your initiation to just make sure you can actually introduce it into your lifestyle. Some of them, they fall short for the silliest reasons. Well, silly without being too judgmental, but it's not about their capacity. It's that they can't introduce it into their like family life or into their social environment. So for example, they have their New Year's party and they have to drink a glass of champagne or whatever, and they're like, I couldn't say no, I couldn't resist. And I'm
Interesting.
like, that kind of thing. And they find that out in that 1 year process prior to taking initiation, rather than finding it out that they can't keep it after initiation and then breaking their vows.
Now, Guruji can't obviously like mentor everyone individually. So is it like if someone is initiated, they're under you or under Jai Gopal or something like that?
Right. So at the moment, under us would be too strong an expression. They are encouraged to listen to his satsangs daily, to try to be in contact with Guruji as much as possible. And we do offer mentorship and we do help them. But I wouldn't go to the whole extent of saying they're under me, right? Because again, he's here, he's with us. And so he is a relatively accessible person, even though we have the numbers we do. He speaks a lot, travels a lot, makes an effort to be, in some capacity available to everybody. And so we also try to discourage the idea of us Swamis being gurus at this point, because we feel like it's unnecessary at this point. B, it can also be a distraction. Because the fact of the matter is that he is far more qualified than we are at this point. And why take a B option when you can take the A option? So rather focus all your attention, devotion, prayers, whatever it may be, towards him for as long as you have him. And when he doesn't, we'll see what is his instruction and what works best for us. But for now, we are guides in some sense, and we definitely support. Majority of my time is spent supporting devotees, but not as their guru, even if I've initiated them.
This may be a touchy topic. Maybe you don't want to talk about this, but succession.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Talk about anything.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Succession. Have you discussed that?
Yeah.
I mean, because you could learn so much from ISKCON.
Yes.
or in all other societies where there is a one guru, and then everything is based on him and
Yes, yes,
initiating everyone, and then when he disappears, then
Well, look, I'll
There
give
may
you an
be
example.
issues of succession,
For sure,
right.
we've spoken about all of this. So say, take the example of someone like Satya Sai Baba.
okay, yeah,
The whole mission was Satya Sai Baba centric. He's everything.
yes.
Right? He left his body, utter chaos, because there was no succession plan. There was
I'm not
no,
aware of what happened.
So, but just from studying different environments, because I also learned from the ISKCON example.
Yeah.
And so his example is that when it's too centered on one person without a succession plan, chaos ensues to the point where lots of claimants came afterwards saying, I'm the one.
Oh,
who
I'm
should
the
be in
one.
charge."
Right, right,
Yes,
right. Yes, yes.
yes.
Because he didn't leave somebody in charge specifically.
Yes.
So that's one situation. Then you have the ISKCON situation. And again, looking from the outside, looks like some rough patches in the early stages of people accepting, people taking on responsibilities, they're being questioned, et cetera, and then somehow it's all figured itself out in some healthy capacity now, looks to me at least.
Yeah.
Interesting conversation we had was with Satyanarayan Das, who you had on your,
Yes,
on your
yes.
podcast.
Sure, sure.
I'm going to film one with him as well soon, actually.
Oh, nice.
But I was having lunch with him and with Guruji in Vrindavan some time back, and we were talking about this topic of succession. And we wanted to see what his stance is on this. And he was saying, if there isn't a named successor before the Guru departs, you're guaranteed a mess. If the Guru hasn't said, this is the person who succeeds me, or this is the system that succeeds me, or whatever it is, if that's not clear from the Guru before he leaves, you are guaranteed a mess, right? And we agreed with him, yeah? So then I said, as a counterpoint though, but the issue is if the Guru announces this publicly, you almost already kick off the succession process before it's actually time to succeed the Guru. Because everybody would be looking to the successors and saying, well, we already should start making our relationships with them and getting in their good books and sort of doing all this sort of politicking, because we know eventually this is going to be the person calling the shots.
Yeah.
Right? And that is a form of sort of distraction and distortion of the principles, and you start to introduce some manipulation and things like this into the game, which is human nature, but it's not something you want. And so the truth of the matter is the Guruji has a succession plan, but it's not public.
Right.
Okay.
So how then to safeguard that in a way that once we publicize it, they won't think we made it up? Simple, because now we just film him. You just film him saying what he wants.
Right.
You have him sign something like that, and then you just keep that locked
Yeah.
up, and you don't release it until time comes.
Right.
Right? But it's I'm not saying it's exactly like that, but we have a 90% of a succession plan figured out already by him. Right? And I think it's an absolute necessity. And in that succession plan, what I can say about it is that most likely it won't be that the Swamis become gurus, but that one person will be appointed as a successor. And then that person, in the same way as he is now, is the guru, and the others are still representatives or proxies in some capacity or other.
Okay.
So always have sort of one central person,
Yeah.
and the others in service to that person in some capacity. But again, the intricacies of that is too early to speak on that now.
Yeah. What happened in Gaudiya Vaishnavism after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada's guru? Did he wanted to establish like a governing body?
Yeah.
But what happened was it became
There was a big
like
dispute.
yeah, but it became then everyone kind of broke off and made their own societies with them as the acharya, and then after that everyone, it was like
But
very
was it
much
autonomous? Like, was it separate, or were they all just united in some leadership capacity? Because there was 11 acharyas, right?
well no, that was Srila Prabhupada.
So that's after
Okay.
Srila Prabhupada.
Okay, so
yeah,
before-
before Prabhupada's
His
guru.
guru.
Right.
Yeah, his guru.
What did
There
he
was
put in
already
place?
an issue of succession there as well, where they formed kind of different camps. I don't know the intricacies of the history,
Yeah.
but that they formed different camps and had different mutts, basically. And there was a lot of
Like if these
of
while
dispute.
they were with Bhaktisiddhanta, they had him as a unifier, but then when he left, any issues that they might have had,
Led to
it came
schisms.
out. Yeah, and oh no, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to start my own thing. I'm going to start my own thing. But it was all under the umbrella term of Gaudiya Mutt.
Yes. It's funny, I had a conversation with Guruji about that. I said to him, once you're gone, if one of my godbrothers starts to deviate from the points that you have taught me personally,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stand by that. I'll make my own version, right?
Yes.
And he got really disappointed in me.
Wow.
yeah.
Like
Right.
He literally turned to me and he's like, all right, then you can take off your orange clothes today, if that's how you're going to be.
Wow.
Wow.
Like, and he said, look, it's not that and later we spoke about it, and his point was, it's not that I disagree with your intention, but it's the wrong mentality. If your immediate solution is to divide the mission,
Yes.
is to separate, that's the wrong mentality. It's like you have to fight to the death almost to unite, to hold together.
Wow.
That's something Srila Prabhupada said, you will show your love for me by how you cooperate with each other.
Yeah.
Exactly. The
And
same.
so in ISKCON, with something to ISKCON's, what's the word?
Sounds credit.
Merit?
Credit. Yeah, ISKCON's credit. To ISKCON's credit is that even though disciples might have had differences or different emphasis, it's like, oh, Hridayananda Maharaj might have certain emphasis, Ranat Swami might have certain emphasis, but they stay united under ISKCON because they want to say, okay, we're Prabhupada disciples, and even though we have different emphases, we can still be together in the same society and work together.
No, please.
No, I was
And again, to recognize that there's actually space for diversity, there's actually a need. As you were talking about, Swami, actually, even within Bhakti Marga, right, that there are these devotees who have different kind of inner yearnings and different, even just on a human level, right, different personalities, different practices to which they're drawn. So hopefully finding space within the collective society for all of those differences while kind of carrying the same goals, the same goals, and being able to cooperate. So yeah, within ISKCON, I feel we actually do have, not that they're defined camps or anything like that, but you have devotees who kind of approach things in different ways, and they join together internally.
I think it's beautiful. I think it takes maturity. It just takes a lot of maturity.
Yeah, for sure.
Maturity is the number one thing. When I spoke to Hridayananda Goswami, one of the things he said to me, I picked up from him very clearly, and he said it in our conversation. I'm very loyal to ISKCON, but I've burned a lot of bridges by being who I am, right? And he's like, but that doesn't break my loyalty to ISKCON, and I will be loyal to ISKCON forever in a sense, because that's my guru's instruction and that's how I feel, right? Yeah. But yet he understands that my way of seeing things and my way of doing things is not everybody else's way of seeing things and doing things. But that doesn't mean that I'm now doing something apart from ISKCON, right? And I feel like that's somehow, it resonated with me in the sense that, if that day ever comes where I have disagreements with somebody else in the way forward or how we should present certain things, then I can follow that model as well, in the sense of saying, that doesn't mean I'm going to deviate from Bhakti Marga or make something else or create a schism. I'll have to learn to coexist, and that's going to require simply maturity and a clear desire to remain united.
Yes, I mean, but there's definitely something to say about deviation after the guru passes.
For sure. I'll tell you a story. It's kind of intense, but So Guruji, he is a very experientially teaching person, if that makes sense. Like, he doesn't always teach only through Shastra and words. Sometimes he'll orchestrate in a situation and then you'll learn from that situation.
Right.
So we were having lunch one day, myself and two others, and he turns to me and he says, come with me, I need to talk to you privately. And so I went with him to the side and he said, I'm going to die today. And I said, oh, okay. And he had a serious face, and so I took him seriously. I said, okay, look, it's not foreign to me. Great souls can know when they're going to leave their body, and so okay. He says, and I want to give you some instructions before I go. So he sat with me for 20 minutes, gave me a bunch of instructions. Then he did the same thing for the other two people that were there at the lunch table. And then he said, okay, now it's time. And he, to some extent, left his body. His body was there, and for 5 minutes he wasn't breathing. Okay?
For 5 minutes he wasn't breathing.
Wasn't breathing.
Wow.
Just no pulse. Okay? And I remember watching the reaction of the people there. There was 3 of us only, right? And one of them was completely fine. Another one got a bit emotional. And I just hung on to his instructions for dear life. I was like, okay, I need to remember these.
Yeah.
Just duty. Duty overcame me, right? It's like I have to do this. After 5 minutes, he came back. Just popped back up, and we had some conversations. It's not something private in a sense, but everything resumed as normal. Right? And I asked him sometime later, like, why? What was that about? And he said, well, I have my reasons, but I always like to prepare you all for something real before it actually happens. So like a simulation of sorts, because you learn a lot from that already. It's as close to real as you can get. So you see your own reaction. You see how you would respond to such a situation. And so I was confronted with myself. I understood that I am very dharmic in that sense. I will do my duty. I didn't cry. I didn't go into any emotions, whereas others did, right? But there was a really curious insight from it. And the reason why I told you this, even though it's a bit out there, is because I remember thinking the next day, now what if he didn't come back? And I just went to all my godbrothers and said, hey, so he left me some instructions. I have no proof of this. It's just my word. Will you believe me? Because the instructions he gave me would impact their lives also.
Yeah.
It wasn't just something private for me to do in my sadhana.
Okay.
It was mission related. It was, I want you to take this responsibility. I want you to do this or that.
Yeah.
And I looked at them in the eyes and I said, would you have believed me? And to their credit, and you know, we really are a strong brotherhood, many of them said yes, and many of them said, I'd really have to feel you in that moment. I don't know. I cannot tell you right now. I'd have to look you in the eyes and feel what you're telling me. And even then, if I'm honest, I may still not believe you, just because if it's not convenient to me, what you're telling me, if your truth is not convenient to my life, I know that I am not saint enough to just surrender to your words. You know, it's already a struggle enough to surrender to my guru, let alone your testimony, right? And I understood in that moment that when the day does come, unless everything is done openly and transparently and written down, and I don't believe it can ever fully be, because you'll always have personal conversations. Everybody will always say, yes, but he told me this in my life, or I have a letter from him, or I have a message from him, or I have an email, whatever, right?
Yeah.
There will always be people who come and make claims. And the truth of the matter is that I had to make peace with the fact that I might fall short of believing those claims myself when someone else makes it, just as others would of me.
Yeah.
And that's almost inevitable. And it made me sad to some extent, because my guru will leave instructions that I won't believe in and won't follow, right? Not because of him, but because of the vehicle through which he left it, the person who he left it to. Right. And any personal issue I have with that person will serve as an obstruct to me accepting.
Totally. Totally.
And it made me sad. And I don't know the solution to something like that, right? Because what will I say now? Guruji, don't tell anybody anything in private, only in open, you know, forums with video and whatever else. I can't do that. That makes no sense. Right. And so I feel like there's an inevitability to this, that with the passing of any guru, everything becomes a little more diluted or a little more distorted, inevitably. Because to get everybody accepting the authority of secondhand information. And then I had a thought, how often has that happened historically?
Yeah.
A lot.
A lot.
So then you start to think, well, Krishna had a point when he said to Arjuna that this knowledge has been given before, but it's been lost, and so here I am again. And you see how it can happen without any ill intention. I will pass on things that my guru said to me to people, and they will not believe, not because he didn't say it, but because it comes from me. And they're like, oh, I don't like him, so I won't believe it, even if it's true. And then I feel sad that that person is missing an instruction from their guru, not because of the instruction being bad, but because I'm the one giving it. And they don't trust me.
That's a very deep observation.
It is, yeah.
Really brings to mind just the necessity also to the best of our ability, kind of accepting the teachings of our tradition or accepting the teachings of our gurus in a complete way, right? Because I feel even when the instructions are well documented, like for example, in our own movement, Srila Prabhupada, his letters have been archived. Many of his conversations have been archived. But there may still be a propensity for people to kind of look where they want to look.
Cherry pick.
To cherry pick a little bit. So, you know, when you're saying this, you know, it's very sobering, and it's just a reminder of how we really want to accept what's being given. As you said, because it's being given by the guru, it's being given by our spiritual authorities, but at the same time, how it's filtered.
You know, something that came to my heart a few times when I've been dealing with this topic is, because also not only do you have the problem of cherry picking, but you also have the problem of misinterpreting. So you read something that they said, and you know, it's like, for example, when I send WhatsApps to people, sometimes they get offended, but they don't hear the tone with which I'm saying it because it's just words, right? Yeah. And we know that, you know, online communication is a wonderful thing, right? Everybody gets offended by everybody.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, what will I really need to make sure that I'm interpreting things as correctly as possible, right? And the only thing that comes to my mind is somebody who knows the heart of my guru, So I would need a filter who not only knew his words, but knows the heart of my guru, who knows him, or who is connected to him not in an intellectual capacity, but in a spiritual capacity, in a heart-to-heart connection in some sense. And now we're diving into the world of the subjective, or at least the far less clear, because to clearly judge somebody as being spiritually connected or not, and you can give me a whole list of qualifications if you want, but it's still me applying that list onto someone, and I have to be the adjudicator of that person's spiritual level. And honestly, at some point, I think we all have to concede that our own hearts have to guide us in some capacity.
Yes, I was going to make that point. Yeah,
Totally a matter of the heart.
That's totally what I was going to say about how there's something to say about purifying oneself, and then Krishna within the heart will guide you if there is some doubts about whatever it might be. But the practice that our gurus have given us to take those on seriously, and then to become ourselves perfect and, you know, and clear in our hearts and minds, and then to be able to, you know, live our lives in that way, I think is something really important. Not just, we always hang on, of course we hang on to our gurus and their scripture and everything like that, but I mean, we're flying our own plane, so to say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed.
This has been really fascinating conversation, by the way. I have a few more questions.
Please.
About, you know, in ISKCON, we are big on preaching, outreach, and book distribution, Harinam, Sankirtan in the streets, and things like that. Yoga studios, even. What is in Bhakti Marga the teaching or the mood for spreading it?
Yeah, we're not as missionary in that sense. We absolutely do outreach and all these sort of things, but I think we're trying our best to adapt to the current situations. I don't think books are very popular these days, which is not to say that people don't read them, but compared to what it was before, especially during Srila Prabhupada's time,
media has changed a lot.
Absolutely, right.
Sure.
So we try to be quite present online, you know, our YouTube stuff and just different things like this.
Yeah.
We make a concentrated effort to say, look, and I remember having a conversation with one of my godbrothers, Swami Aniruddha.
I'm his fan. I really like his YouTube channel.
Nice.
So if you're listening, Swami, I'm a fan of yours.
nice. He's a very nice guy.
Yes, very nice. Seems like.
So we're close friends, and one of the conversations that we had was when he was starting his YouTube channel, right? We were having a talk about this, and he's not a tech guy at all. Like, he's the kind of guy that if he could, he would live in a mountain in a cave and just do his sadhana all day. He's a nature boy at heart. Right? And so he started a YouTube channel, and like, he's learning how to video edit. He's getting these cameras, and he's getting support from as many people as possible. Wow. And I found it hilarious. I just looked at him. I was like, bro, this does not suit you at all. But he said, but you know why I'm doing it? Because, you know, we do these meetings, we do these gatherings, we go to the temple, and 50 people come, 100 people come for my lecture. But if I just sit in my room and record myself and then press upload, I get 1,000 people or 2,000 people or whatever. And I'm just thinking, why put my hours into the 100 people when I can get 1,000 people? And he's like, not to say that there isn't some value to the in-person one as well, because you can ask questions and it's more real in some sense.
Yeah.
But he's like, I definitely can't neglect that other audience. And that took me a while to eventually go, yeah, he's right, and I should do it too. And I started my own. But I think that's really the mentality we're taking at the moment, is try to do things online. I can only see our future becoming more and more online based as much as possible. And in the physical world, I mean, we're opening temples and ashrams as a huge emphasis. We want places where people can come together that are ours. But in terms of book distribution and going out on the streets, we have done Harinam. We do some street kirtan and stuff like that. But it would be a lie if I said that is a focus or something that we really emphasize or anything like that. We don't. And I think, I'm not sure that we've ever had a conversation as to why that is, or if there's any, you know, criticism to that. From our side, I don't think there is. It's just never been emphasized as such. I think a lot of our growth has happened from either our online presence or word of mouth, just people feeling comfortable enough to tell their friends and family and about, you know, inviting them to our events and inviting them to our spaces.
I think the online thing is something that ISKCON and Gaudiya Vaishnavism can really learn from. Like, you guys really put a lot of energy into the online presence, and people who might, like, for example, the Vivek Ramaswamy episode that you did, someone might not even know about, you know, Vaishnavism or something. They just see his face, your face, and they click on it. And, you know, there's like thousands of comments, and people get exposed to Vaishnavism. And that's really, and that's like the currency these days, right? Of it's just online, social media, YouTube. Like Dino is also like Swami Aniruddha. Like he has like, do you have your phone on you?
Yeah.
He's got it. He's got.
I don't know how long the world will let me do this, but
Amazing. Amazing.
so it's really
It has WhatsApp, believe it or not.
Props to you.
No, but I really appreciate your point, Swami, that, you know, whether we like it or not, whether our personal taste, you know, allows for, you know, engagement with tech or not, the reality is that the world's moving in this direction, and especially if we have a mission at heart, we have to adapt to it. And it actually did bring one question to mind, if it's all right. It was just that, you know, since you all have such a strong online presence, and I also want to echo what Nam is saying, just the quality of it is so beautiful. It's like really very engaging and wonderfully done. So I was just wondering if you end up having devotees and members of your Sangha who actually kind of exist in the online space. In other words, because of location or various circumstances, they don't have the opportunity even to have the in-person Sangha.
Yeah.
And how are you able to take care of those people, and how do those people kind of develop spiritually, though it's happening kind of in a virtual space?
You're right. No, a lot of people do come from that kind of scenario, and they don't have the ability to meet us physically. And I think how we look after them suboptimally, to be honest with you. And that's something that we need to work on. It's something that we need to think, how are we going to create possibilities for those people to get in contact with us in a real way, like one-to-one, and really start to deepen their life. Because of course the goal is not to have them be virtual devotees where they just sort of watch videos and that's the end of their devotional life.
Right.
But it is something that we're learning. You see, this is the cool thing, and in a sense, an exciting thing about this time we're in now is that this is the first generation dealing with these things. Yes. We don't know best practices with online preaching and YouTube and all these different things. Yeah. So we're all just trying stuff, right? And one thing that we settled on is that, quality matters. Like if you present yourself with good quality, people are going to treat you with a different, like, say, level of seriousness, or they're going to consider you in some different fashion. And so I really think that it's a work in progress, how we're going to reach out to those people and really care for them. But for sure, I know of a lot of cases of people that are avid followers of what we do, but have never physically met any of us.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Especially in India. Like in India, we have an ashram in Vrindavan, and we have another ashram starting now in Pandapur in Maharashtra.
Oh, cool.
But India is huge.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of Indians watching our stuff. And our community is not huge in India at the moment, right? Because the flagship is in Europe, the majority of our devotees have been historically in Europe. Yeah. And so we have pockets in South America, here in the States, in India, etc. But it's a gradual thing. And so until the physical locations meet the demand of the virtual world, in a sense, there's going to be tons of people just sort of not getting the optimal care that I would normally say that a devotee merits in this kind of situation.
Yeah, one devotee we had here on the podcast, like I think it was 2 days ago, his name is Kalakanta Prabhu. He was speaking about how in America, the barrier for people becoming Hare Krishna devotees is that so much, it kind of like, he's also friends with Hridayananda Maharaj, and about how the Indian cultural part of Krishna consciousness, sometimes people can't get past that. And so that's a barrier to becoming a Hare Krishna devotee. And so one of those main things was the role of women in Krishna consciousness. And so how in the past 50 years, women, because of certain, scriptural things that have been said, that women have been kind of put to the back and things like that. So does Bhakti, I know Bhakti Marga has women sannyasis, is that right? True. Can you tell us a little bit more about the gender roles?
If I'm being dead honest, there's almost nothing to tell, because the female roles is pretty much identical to the male one,
right?
In every way. So we have our own version of the GBC, which is our own governing body. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We don't call it GBC, but we have our own. Yeah. And in that body, there's men and women. Yeah. In our departments at headquarters, actually the majority of the departments are managed by women, truth be told. But that's not by design. It's just so happened to be that they were the most qualified people.
Right.
And yeah, so in that sense, look, there is always maybe there's one distinction, which is because Guruji is a man, naturally the people around him doing personal service are going to be men.
Yes.
just by nature of him being a man.
Right.
But apart from that, I can't even tell you one point of difference between the role of the man and women necessarily. So also in the temple worship, for example. So we'll keep one gender on the altar. We won't mix genders on the altar. So like not to create, let's say, any kind of confusions, let's say. But we'll have temple services that are exclusively for women and temple that are only for men. Like what I mean by that is in our main temple in Schiebertenila in Germany, we have our main altar where the men serve. But then every morning we have a yagna, for example, that is done and then everybody can attend. But that's always done by the women. The men never do the yagna. So that they also have some service to do for the deities, for example. Or we have another temple on the property which is dedicated to Rukmini and Panduranga. And only the women serve there also. No men serve there. Because we want to give equal opportunity to serve the deities, the men and women, but we don't want to mix them.
Yes.
Just because sannyasis and brahmacharis and all this sort of thing.
Right.
So we don't mix in that sense. The roles, I mean, their living scenarios are separated for the monastics, right? But there's no, like I really can't speak on it because there's just no difference between what one is allowed to do and what the other isn't.
Very interesting. And is there an emphasis also for renunciation or monasticism for the women if women are inclined in that way?
Same way that it is for the men. Yeah, like again, no distinction there. So we actually have more female brahmacharis than we do male.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know why that is. I can't really tell you. It's more just, I think in general, in most spiritual paths, there tend to be more women than men.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As we all
Totally.
know, right?
Yes.
And so the minute they're allowed the same things that the men are allowed to, without any distinction, I think it's just natural that there'll be more women in everything than men, in the sense that there'll be more women devotees, there'll be more women brahmacharis, maybe one day there'll be more women swaminis, who knows? But that's the situation we have there at the moment.
It's really interesting.
But it is funny though, even despite you sort of allowing them to do everything the same, how they do still gravitate to different things naturally, right? And I think all this equality talk that there is in the world today, there's a lot of goodness to it, there's a lot of weirdness to it, without unpacking that kind of worms. But like it is beautiful to see from my point of view how the women who are sannyasis, for example, the swaminis, I have been in, so for context, I'm in a situation where I often train the swamis, the up-and-coming swamis, philosophically, sort of shastra, stuff like this, right? And not all of them, but by and large, they don't care as much about the shastra training and the philosophy training, the women sannyasis. They're like, yeah, okay, I'll get the gist of it, give me the basics, I'll get that. But what they really want to do is almost like the pastoral care. They want to just look after the people.
Yes. Natural.
Right, and I'm just like, well, there you go.
Really
Women,
important.
female sort of nature in a sense, right? Nothing is being coached into them to do that. They're being presented with the same opportunities, but they're naturally taking something else, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the men, and they gravitate towards the things that will grant them respect and authority. So it's like the more competent I am, and the more I'm qualified in philosophy and shastra and whatever else, then I can stand tall as a person of authority. And they will still go and care for the people, but in a more reserved way, right? And these are natural occurrences, right? It's not something that we're coaching into them or that we're emphasizing. It's just different natures, right? And it actually creates a pretty cool, balanced community.
Yeah, that's really nice because, you also get sometimes where there's, especially in kind of like the Hindu traditions, we can say, there's a heavy reliance upon ritual a lot of the time. And so my friend and I, we speak sometimes about how, you can do a wedding ceremony, but there may not necessarily be something like marriage counseling, where, there's actually that upkeep of the actual commitment. In the eyes of the institution or in the eyes of the organization. Or same thing with like you can do last rites for someone, but then you're offering grief support. So it sounds like there's a nice balance.
Are you guys doing that? Like, are you as a mission, or is it more circumstantial? Or
I think it's more. I mean, Dina, his occupation is, you're
a chaplain. So there's some emphasis on offering that kind of in-person presence, but I think organizationally there's still some ground to be covered. But it is becoming more like within ISKCON, it's becoming more of like a buzzword right now, like devotee care, community care, which I think is very important. I think it can only be a good sign that that's becoming more part of the conversation.
I'm with you 100%. And one of the things I've noticed, especially here in America, I've spent some time here now, a lot of the really successful evangelical churches, they emphasize community and personal care so much from what I could see. And I thought maybe they're just, it's all talk. And then you want to almost go there and see, like, are they going to walk the talk? Are they really going to care for me and maintain contact with me and all of this? And I've had someone who went and tried just to like
see how it is.
They do.
Wow.
And you just go, yeah, there's something to learn there.
It's so important.
Because I think in our communities, and I don't know if it's it's not because we're worse people, that I don't believe, but it's because I think there's something in our philosophy, in our teachings as Vaishnavas, that there is always a little bit of detachment, almost like you don't want to care too much.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into a Jada Bharata situation. Almost, right? And you're like, I'll care for you, but in moderation.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it acts as a deterrent to just being good people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's someone I interviewed who has started like a 10-step program for devotees. Like if anyone is struggling with addiction or whatever it may be, there's some support for them, and there's a whole bhakti recovery group. Yeah. So there's that kind of devotee care thing as well.
But there's a lot of psychology in the Gita and in Shastra in general. Like if you want to tackle it from that angle, there's a lot that you can extract from that can then help people in these situations. You don't have to do it in a secular way, or you don't have to do it in a way that you feel like you're betraying your Vaishnava principles.
Yeah,
right.
I know Satyanarayan Babaji, he has a big focus on psychology.
He does, yeah.
Like to become a devotee, there's like certain things that you need to like work out. If you might have some issues in psychology, but to work those things out on with a Vedic lens, and then so you can properly practice and things. I think that's something to say about that.
There's value to it, for sure. Yeah, I think you're right in saying that he's really emphasizing that quite a bit at the moment, and I think I'm curious to see the results, right? But I think there's definitely truth in incorporating more of that at the very least.
Yeah. So I think we're at time, but Swami, it's been a really fascinating conversation. It's really a pleasure to meet you, to learn more about Bhakti Marga. I really thank you for driving down here and talk with us.
Pleasure to meet you guys too.
Yeah.
It felt really short, the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an hour and a half, so
nice.
Really, really nice. And Jai Gopal, thank you so much for joining us also off camera there. And did you have anything else, Dina?
No, I just feel so grateful to have met you, Swami, and to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Nam for
pleasure.
including
Yeah, no, I truth be told, I was, different devotees who I spoke to were like, are you sure you want to do this podcast? And in my heart, I felt like, what's the wrong thing about just conversing with someone, another Vaishnava, when you have similarities or differences or not, but in a human level, we can connect. And I felt that connection for sure. And I really am grateful to you, Maharaj.
Thank you. I appreciate the openness to do that.
Yeah.
I think, maturity and openness. And I thank you for that as well.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Take care.